By the middle of 2008, there were only a handful of people in the world who still believed Elon Musk was going to make it. His employees did not believe. They had said the polite things in the meetings, and they had nodded when he made his promises about the next quarter and the next round of funding and the next thing that was supposed to change everything. But they had also, very quietly, begun to update their resumes. They had begun to ask their friends at other companies whether there might be a job opening for someone with their skills. They had begun to think, on the long drives home, about what they would tell their children if their father was about to lose his career to a man who was being called, by some of the smartest people in California, a fool. The investors did not believe. The articles in the newspapers did not believe. The men who had been kind to him at parties when he was still buying private jets did not believe. They watched him from a careful distance now, the way people watch a man who has, in their view, walked too far out onto a frozen lake. They did not want to be near him when the ice gave. His wife at the time, Justine, did not believe by then in many things. The marriage had grown harder than either of them had expected. There had been a loss. There had been a child, the first one, who had not lived. There had been the years after, when the grief had not been spoken about clearly, because there had not been time, because there had been companies to save, and rockets to launch, and meetings that could not be cancelled, and a calendar that did not have room for the slow human work of staying close to one's wife after the worst thing has happened. By the late autumn of 2008, the marriage was almost over. By the early December of 2008, Tesla had, by most accounts, between 3 and 5 weeks of cash left. By the third week of December, Elon Musk did not know whether he would lose the company, lose his marriage, or lose both in the same season on the same calendar. Then, on a particular Tuesday night, in a house that was no longer entirely his, he sat down at a kitchen table that the children had been eating breakfast at that same morning, and he opened a notebook. This is the story of the sentence he wrote in it. Then, on a particular Tuesday night, in a house that was no longer entirely his, he sat down at a kitchen table that the children had been eating breakfast at that same morning, and he opened a notebook. This is the story of the sentence he wrote in it. The notebook was older than the crisis. He had been carrying it in some form since the early days of Zip 2, since the years when he was a young man in his 20s, sleeping in the same room he worked in, eating from the same microwave he kept beside his computer. The notebook had survived the move to Palo Alto. It had survived the sale of PayPal. It had survived the move to Los Angeles, and then to El Segundo, and then to the small house in Bel Air where the failures of 2008 were starting to gather like weather. It was a plain black notebook. The cover was scratched. The corners were soft from being carried in different jacket pockets. The pages had been used only a little. Elon was not the kind of man who wrote in journals every night. He wrote in this notebook only on certain nights. He wrote in it when something was wrong. He wrote in it when he had run out of people to talk to about what was wrong. On that Tuesday in December, he had run out of people. His mother was in Toronto. He did not want to call her. He did not want to be the kind of son who called his mother when his life was failing. Not because he was ashamed of her, but because he was ashamed of having let her hopes come to this. She had spent her whole life believing he was going to do something extraordinary. He could not bring himself that night to be the small voice on the line that asked her to believe it for him one more time when he could not believe it himself. His brother Kimball was in Colorado. They had spoken earlier that week. There was nothing more for Kimball to say. Kimball had said the things a brother says. Kimball had reminded him of who he was and where he came from and what they had both come through. But the things a brother can say have limits.
There is a kind of night a brother cannot reach.
His wife was upstairs in a room they no longer used together. The marriage was, by then, mostly a series of practical conversations about the children. He did not go upstairs that night. He did not want to bring what he was carrying into a room where she was trying, the way he had not yet managed to try, to sleep. So he sat at the kitchen table. The house was very quiet. The children were asleep. The lights in the kitchen were off, except for a single lamp over the table. The kind of small lamp that exists in every house and that nobody ever notices except on nights like this one, when it is the only thing standing between a person and the dark. He opened the notebook. He looked at the last entry he had written. It had been months ago. It had been something small, a phrase, an observation. He did not read it carefully. He turned the page. He had a pen in his hand. He did not remember picking up the pen. He sat there for a long time before he wrote anything. There are men who write in journals every day. There are men who fill page after page with their fears and their plans and their grievances and their dreams. There are men who treat the act of writing as a kind of self-therapy, a way of metabolizing the day so they can sleep. Elon Musk was not, and is not, that kind of man. He has written in his notebooks very rarely. He has written when there was no one else who could be told what had to be said. He has written when the only person who could carry a particular sentence was himself. That December night, what he needed to say was something he had not been able to say to anyone. Not to his wife, not to his employees, not to his brother, not to his mother. He had not even been able to say it to himself out loud on the long walks he had been taking through the dark side streets of Bel Air, in the hours when the rest of the household was finally asleep. What he needed to say was the simple, terrible thing that had been sitting under everything else for months. He did not know whether he could keep going. He did not know whether the next decision was going to be the right one. He did not know whether the next loan would close. He did not know whether the next launch would succeed. He did not know whether his marriage could be saved, whether the company could be saved, whether the version of himself that he had been building since he was 8 years old could be saved. He did not know. And he was, that night, more tired than he had ever been in his life. He sat at the kitchen table and he held the pen, and he did not write anything for a long time. He thought about his mother. He thought about May in Toronto, who had spent the last 40 years believing in him on faith more than evidence. He thought about the small boy in the Pretoria living room who had once listened to a song on a radio while he waited for a father who did not come home. He thought about the 17-year-old who had stood at a kitchen counter in 1990 and made a promise to that same mother. A promise to always call, no matter what, no matter where he was, no matter what he was building or fixing or fighting. He thought about all the years he had kept that promise. He thought about what it would mean if he could not anymore keep the larger promise underneath it, the one he had never said out loud, the one that lived in the bones of everything he had ever tried to build. He did not know whether he could keep that one. He sat there with the pen in his hand, and then, in a single, quick movement that was not really a decision so much as a survival, he wrote. He wrote one sentence. It was short. It was not poetic. It was not dramatic. It was not the kind of sentence a man would write if he was trying to impress himself. It was the kind of sentence a man writes when he has run out of everything else and only has one thing left to say. He wrote, "The future is not given. It is kept." He looked at it for a long time after he had written it. He read it back to himself. He read it back again. The words did not look unusual on the page. They were simple words. But somewhere in the act of writing them down, of seeing them in his own handwriting, in his own notebook, on his own kitchen table, in his own house at the end of his worst year, somewhere in the act of writing them, something inside him quieted. Not because the words made him certain, not because they solved anything, not because they brought back his marriage, or his cash position, or the rocket launches that had not worked, but because, by writing them, he had reminded himself of a thing he had let himself forget for almost the entire year. The future was not promised to anybody, not to him, not to the men who had been kind to him before, not to the men who would not return his calls now, not to the children sleeping upstairs, not to his mother in Toronto, not to the small boy in the Pretoria living room who had once believed that the world would, eventually, become a place worth waiting for. The future was not given. It had to be kept. And keeping it was, that night, the only thing he still had the authority to do. He closed the notebook. He turned off the lamp. He walked upstairs without going into the room where his wife was sleeping. He went to a small couch in a study at the back of the house. He lay down. He closed his eyes. He did not sleep that night more than 2 hours. But 6 days later, the emergency funding round closed. 6 days after that, the fourth Falcon 1 launch made it to orbit. 6 weeks after that, Tesla received the loan that allowed it to keep its doors open through the next quarter. History would record those events as miracles. The notebook remained the entire time in his jacket pocket. He has carried the notebook with him for almost 18 years now. It has been to every Tesla factory. It has been to every SpaceX launch. It has been to congressional hearings and product announcements and shareholder meetings and quiet rooms at the back of houses he no longer owns. It has been, in some version or another, in some jacket pocket or some bag or some drawer of some desk, almost continuously for the entire arc of the life that came after. He has not bought a new one. He has not transferred the sentence to another book. He has not, as far as anyone close to him can confirm, written that particular sentence anywhere else. The original notebook still exists. The page is still folded back, the way he folded it that night, so the sentence is the first thing he sees when he opens it. The ink has begun to fade. He has not touched it up. He has not traced over the letters with a fresh pen to keep them readable. He has, the people closest to him say, let the sentence fade the way the kind of sentence a man writes at the lowest moment of his life is supposed to fade. Not because it is no longer needed, but because the keeper of the sentence has, in the years since, become a kind of living version of it. There are men who carry the difficult things they have survived in the form of stories they like to tell at dinner. There are men who carry them in the form of advice they like to give to people they are trying to impress. Elon Musk carries his in a small notebook with a faded line of ink across one page. He has never, in any public setting, read that sentence out loud. He has never, by any account, said it to his wife, or his mother, or his brother, or his children. He has only, sometimes, on certain nights, in certain houses, when the work has stopped for a few hours and the rest of the world has finally gone quiet, opened the notebook and looked at it. And when he closes it, he has the thing he needs to walk back into the morning. There are many ways to understand a life like his. You can understand him through the rockets. You can understand him through the cars.
You can understand him through the wealth or the controversies or the headlines that, on any given week, can tell you whatever you want to be told. But if you want to understand the part that does not show, the part that has, more than any single product or company or speech, carried him forward, you have to understand the night at the kitchen table.
You have to understand the woman upstairs in a room he no longer entered. You have to understand the mother in Toronto he did not want to call. You have to understand the children sleeping in the next part of the house, who would, on certain mornings in the years after, climb onto his lap and ask him for things he would have, by then, the means to give. And you have to understand the man, in the dark, with the pen, who could not name a single thing he was certain of, except for one sentence in a notebook. The future is not given. It is kept. He has, against the long odds of every year since, kept it. For more reflections on the moments that have shaped one of the most discussed lives of our time, subscribe and find more chapters about the years behind the headlines, the people who have stood beside him, and the small private rituals that have, in the end, mattered more than any of us understood.